What's up? It's Susie from Hey Grill Hey, and today I'm gonna show you how to make a classic Texas style brisket, but we're doing it with a homemade coffee rub. It's time to take those traditional cooking methods and level up the flavor. I'm gonna show you how to do it. Let's get started. Step one for our beautiful coffee rub brisket is the trim. Now I do have a full trimming brisket video on my YouTube channel, so if you want a little more in-depth look at how briskets are trimmed, make sure you check that out. One tip that I do want to offer before we start trimming is to make sure your briskets are very, very cold. You want to pull your brisket directly out of your refrigerator immediately before trimming, or you can even pop it into the freezer for 30 minutes or so. Cold fat is much easier to work with and it's much easier to trim. Now, as I trim out the hard fat across the back, take the top of the brisket down to about 1/4 inch. This is what the final product really looks like on this brisket. I do backyard trims, not perfect competition trims. However, this is gonna yield a beautiful brisket where the fat has the opportunity to render the way that it needs to. It's more aerodynamic in the smoker and it's gonna cook more evenly. So if you've never trimmed a brisket before, like I said, go watch that video. It'll help so much and give you a lot of confidence in making sure that that first trim turns out the exact way you want it to. Once my brisket is trimmed out, it's time for me to make my coffee rub seasoning. I start with 2 tablespoons of kosher salt, 2 tablespoons of instant coffee, and this is very important that we use instant coffee, not coffee grounds. The instant coffee will actually liquefy on the outside of our brisket. It's gonna give us more even coverage instead of just little pockets and granules of coffee flavor in the finished product. It's also gonna help us develop a really beautiful bark on the exterior of the brisket while it's smoking. 2 tablespoons of garlic powder, 2 tablespoons of smoked paprika, 1 tablespoon of black pepper. I'm also adding a tablespoon of crushed coriander, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. This brisket rub is the perfect balance of rich and savory from the coffee, salty and savory, and then you get these really beautiful bright notes from the coriander and heat from the chili pepper and cayenne. We just mix that all together and we're ready to season our brisket. With this particular brisket, I don't use a binder. I want the meat itself to act as the liquefying agent for my instant coffee granules. So I sprinkle liberally on all sides of the brisket, using my hands to really press it into the meat itself. This is one of those few circumstances where you might actually rub a rub to get that coffee to break down and start to work its way into the meat itself. Once my brisket is seasoned, it's time to head out to the smoker. Once the brisket's on, the lid is closed, I'm gonna let this smoke until my brisket reaches an internal temperature of around 165, but more importantly than the temperature is the texture and the bark and the color on the outside. I want this brisket to almost be dry on the outside. I want it to feel like it's starting to set. I want to scrape the brisket and not have anything pull away. This brisket is looking dark, almost chocolatey in color. I'm loving the bark development that we're getting so far. I feel like this one's ready to wrap. This is 24-inch wide butcher paper. Make sure that I can cover every part of this brisket. I pop it on one side and roll, 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 tucking as I go, folding over the end and making sure that this brisket is wrapped up like a beautiful, big, meaty present. My wrapped brisket goes back on the smoker, seam side down to hold that butcher paper on the brisket itself. Still at 225 degrees on my smoker, I'm going to close the lid and let this finish cooking. I really don't need to interfere with it much at this point. This next step can take anywhere between 5 to 8 hours. The goal here is for our brisket to feel very buttery, very soft, very bendy. Our temperature will typically be reading anywhere between 200 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit, but more importantly than that temperature is kind of the texture. That's how we know it's ready. That's how we know it's tender and it's ready to come off the smoker. Once the brisket comes off, it can rest for several hours. In fact, I recommend resting it for at least 1 full hour, if not 2, 3, 4 hours. Now you can rest your brisket in a cooler with some towels to keep it insulated. You can rest it in a low temperature oven. The point is you don't want to immediately pull your brisket off and start slicing. So give yourself a nice window of time that your brisket can potentially be done in, because if it's done early, awesome, you can hold it for several hours. What you don't want to be doing is turning the temperature up at the end, trying to rush a brisket across the finish line because it's late and everybody's hungry. With my brisket well rested, it's ready to slice. Now, the most important part of slicing your brisket is making sure that you go against the grain. Now, in a whole packer brisket like this one, the grain runs in 2 directions. So I use my knife and slice it down the middle. That way I can slice my flat in nice, even, about pencil thick slices. Once our flat is sliced, it's time to move on to the point. I like to rotate it 90 degrees and start on one edge and work my way across. Starting on the edge, you get these really nice crispy ends, and I like to cut those into little cubes for my burnt ends and arrange those on my platter. I slice the point typically a little thicker than I slice my flat because it's fattier, it's bendier, it likes to fall apart a little bit more, and I arrange those on my platter as well. Now, I do have a recipe on my website for a homemade coffee barbecue sauce, which is absolutely phenomenal with the coffee rubbed brisket. So if you want to try your hand at making a homemade barbecue sauce, I'll link that one for you below in the recipe description. And just like that, we have smoked a beautiful coffee rubbed brisket. You know that thing where you pull off a really awesome brisket? It's a feeling that is difficult to describe. I have a friend, Luke from Old Virginia Smokers, and he was on Barbecue USA with Michael Simon, and he wept when he cut into a beautiful brisket. And it is parallel to the feelings that I have when you make something this gorgeous and this delicious and you pull it off in your very own backyard. To me, that's like the epitome of backyard barbecue hero. Like, I feel like with a brisket, we have done it. I love how this is arranged. As I was slicing it, it felt so buttery and so juicy. I mean, even the flat, I like a flat that holds together but still just, it wants to fall apart on you a little bit. And this one is holding on to a ton of moisture. But the real magic here, if you've had a really great Texas style brisket, is in this coffee rub. I think my favorite thing about this rub is that it doesn't necessarily taste like coffee, but it gives you a really rich, earthy undertone. It's this umami flavor that perfectly balances out the brisket. And then in the rub itself, you have just enough salt to keep things interesting and flavorful. And then you get a little bit of heat from the chili and the cayenne. I think it's a really well-balanced brisket rub. If this is something you've had on your list to try, this is your sign. Susie is giving you a sign. Make a brisket, use the coffee rub, and then come back in the comment section and let me know how it works out for you. Or if you're a salt and pepper only person, that's fine too. I would like to hear from you also. But I think this is one of those things that's worth giving a try. The bark is stunning. The cook is beautiful and the flavor is out of this world. This is one of my favorite briskets that we've made, and I've made it a bunch of times. I hope it makes you a backyard barbecue hero for your own family and friends. As always, you can grab the recipe on heygrillhey.com or on the Hey Grill Hey app. See you next time.